It's the magician that best sets the scene for the opening of the Minor Arcana. The one who stands in the card of the Major Arcana numbered 1. His only predecessor is the Fool, whose number is 0 and represents the void before creation. At the Fool stage of the game, the tools of creation are still concealed, hidden from sight inside his pouch. With the magician, however, those tools are set on the table for all to see. They represent the 4 elements: fire, earth, air, and water. By pointing down to the ground with one hand and up to the heavens with the other, the magician is saying that these elemental forces act on all scales of existence, from the subatomic to the galactic and beyond. On the human scale, the 4 elements are translated into familiar objects. Fire, for instance, is presented as a wand, which stands for the life force that courses through every living being. The more stable earth element, the pentacle, is a symbol of physical matter. At its center stands the human body with its 5 senses. After that, there's air, as swift as a sword, a representation of the discriminating intellect cutting away at the false. And finally, contained within the cup is water, symbolizing emotional and spiritual receptivity. By taking these forms, the elements also become literal manifestations of the tools that build our societies. They are the everyday implements that continuously humanize us, like plant life and its yields, like wheels and pulleys and gears, like axes and knives, like glasses and bowls. Mostly, they're the things we take for granted but can't live without. Every suit within the Minor Arcana begins with the monad, the self-created, the One. Next comes the duad, the division of the One into 2, which is the balancing force, the other, the partner, sometimes the shadow. The triad is the sacred trinity, that mysterious creative power behind all of life. The tetrad is foundational, providing solid ground on which to stand. Followed by the pentad, an invitation for self-reflection, which ultimately opens the door to versatility and independence. The hexad is balance. It unites opposites, marrying the sacred feminine and masculine. The heptad represents mastery of the mind, while the ogdoad strives for mastery over the primitive impulses. And then there's the ennead, that seeks spiritual mastery. The decad, card number 10, is the number of perfection, the ultimate goal within each element. Further refinement can be achieved with the 4 remaining court cards, the page, knight, queen, and king. They stand for the different levels of individual mastery over their chosen element, from initiate to virtuoso. In classical times, the 4 court cards were the only ones within the Minor Arcana to be animated by living characters, representatives of society's nobility and royalty. Any station below that was simply depicted as a combination of number and element. When, in the early 1900s, the Rider-Waite deck added visual narratives to the numbered cards, it became apparent that these numbers were telling a multi-layered story. The story of humanity. Whether it be humanity through the ages, or humanity as it plays itself within each of us. The Waite imagery has now become indispensable to the mythology of the lesser mysteries. Still, at its core, the purpose remains the same. That of guide into the deeper meaning of numbers and the elements that color them. The first of the elements, fire, speaks of raw energy, of willpower. Fire is the self-created light born from the darkness. It begins, as all suits begin, with the number 1, more specifically the ace, whose single hand extends a living branch, announcing new life. This usually means a new project. It's the inner spark that gets everything going. The energy that fuels it can be divided into past and future. In other words, into what's already been integrated and what's as of yet unexplored. It's important here not to get lost in either of these polarities, but to balance both until we find that perfect middle, until we're strong enough to travel into uncharted territory while at the same time remaining confident within the self. At this early stage of our journey through the wands, while we're still in the process of creating our personality and mode of self-expression, many possible paths will be put before us. Once we've made our choice, we must stay true to course. In order to better structure this new energetic potential and make it last, deeper and stronger roots must be laid down. It's a time of digging in our heels, when we must commit to the vision, often at the expense of many lesser desires. From those deep roots come sprouting buds, the many sub-personalities that have been lying within, all surfacing at once and competing for the reins of power. Often it could seem that these energies just don't want to mix. Still, we must find a unifying principle, an all-encompassing and comprehensive goal that can inspire them to work together. The more we do this, the more everything naturally falls into place. Eventually, opposing but complementary forces will mutually attract and interlock with one another. This is the beginning of the creation of a wholesome and powerful state of being, and it's only from such a state that higher attainment can be achieved. But first, there are general qualities to be mastered, like the honing of our powers of discrimination, learning to successfully intake the energies that are to our best advantage and rejecting those that aren't. The better we can discern between these, the more we can dominate our surroundings, and the more powerful we become. Next is the development of self-control, so that the volatile fires we're learning to wield don't get scattered. The fire element does tend to easily dissipate itself into thin air, but as long as we could properly ground it, and as long as we maintain the necessary discipline to keep it well fueled, it will shine brightly. Probably the most difficult quality to master when it comes to fire is its spiritual dimension. Since the flame is a conqueror by nature, and it's perpetually on the move, to contain it in a state of inner well-being is an art unto itself. Usually a self-imposed spiritual discipline is only begun after we've survived our own careless handling of the fiery forces. With time, we learn that fire must be treated respectfully. It's to be approached with caution and spent wisely. Those who learn to juggle fire's many trials are masters in their own right. When we come across the Ten of Wands, we're being informed that a specific goal has been achieved. In this respect, we're becoming united to the inner fire that fuels our willpower, at once guiding it and letting it guide us to the desired destination. In the next realm, that of Earth, the most material-oriented element, the Ace of Pentacles presents us with a worldly gift. Although this could come in the form of literal money, most often what the Pentacles offer is that which is able to manifest money, and that is skill. In the case of the Ace, it's a new skill. But life is not something all neat and tidy that presents us with only one clear and easy opportunity. Quite the opposite. People are continuously in the process of handling many responsibilities at once, and there's always new things to be added to the heap. So naturally, only a limited number of them can be given priority at any given time. When a new opportunity presents itself, it usually appears way down at the bottom of our to-do list. By keeping a somewhat even balance between our passion and sense of practicality, we can focus on its slow and steady rise to the top, all the while keeping our many other responsibilities afloat. Further uniting these two parts of our being, the earthly and the visionary, we begin to elevate our chosen skill to new levels, shining our light into the unknown. Here we're building our confidence as we begin a new life in a specific field of study. As we learn to let the talent flow out of us, it slowly manifests itself as a solid landscape, intimately connected to the essence of our being. Just like any lack of such manifestation is also connected to that essence. Sometimes when nothing's moving ahead, it doesn't even matter how much time we put into it, or how much skill we possess. And the more we try to force things, the more deeply we sink, until we have no choice but to admit how little control we actually have over the matter at hand. There's obviously something other than our conscious will leading the whole operation, something beyond our comprehension, but also something that no matter how hard things become always sees us through it, helping us realize that what seemed like merciless punishment was in fact a privileged insight into our own inner division, a chance to further develop our skills, to propel our talents to the next level by nourishing those parts that previously went unacknowledged. If we nourish them adequately, they'll nourish us in return. By tending to their every need, by watching over them carefully in every stage of their growth, we'll eventually be able to judge in which manner each of these can serve us best. This is where our one skill, the one we started out honing in the beginning, will have effectively transformed itself into a whole subset of skills, each one as necessary as the next, and all of them interconnected. Just like within Kundalini, that tradition that works on releasing and raising the primordial power that lies coiled at the bottom of the spine, we can begin to elevate our own stalled potential. We learn to tap right into the core of our lower drives, using their very energy to rise above them, until we reach the point where, with both our feet firmly planted on the ground, we can open up to higher self. Slowly becoming aware of the subtle fields that surround us, we're now coming to the natural understanding that our being as a whole extends beyond its physical boundaries, and that the laws governing the visible are as much rooted in the invisible. This is what's called the wisdom of the senses. With the Ten of Pentacles, this wisdom is acquired through the coming together of body and mind. We now see that the physical realm is something that can be consciously programmed. On a more earthbound level, the Ten of Pentacles is telling us that the particular skill we've been working on is now reaching the peak of its potential. Soaring high above the earthly plane is the Ace of Swords. As it pierces the crown, new ideas and concepts come to light. They are presented as images within the mind's eye, images that seem to appear out of thin air. A new idea is like a scientific theory, in that to gain acceptance it must be weighed against other ideas. The best way to see if it could stand of its own accord is to compare it to its exact opposite. The more it can invalidate its counterpart, the stronger it can become. Better yet is to have these two opposite ideas mutually reinforcing one another. For that to happen, though, none of them can be competing for the title of the absolute truth. Instead, they must act like different parts within a working unit, like the brain's twin hemispheres, continuously playing off each other, seeking perfect balance. For most of us, however, that balance is lacking, and that's usually because of our own negative emotion. The ideological sentimentality that drives us to tip the scale to either side. No matter which way we lean, we end up mostly feeding one part while neglecting another. Only at the center, between these extremes, can we gain a true perspective. There we become equally receptive to both sides. As we learn to let go of the shackles of ideological extremes, we pave the way for new structural groundwork. So begins the clearing of the mind. There are several disciplines that could help us achieve such a state. Mostly they involve simply observing our own thoughts. With practice, the mind becomes clearer and more focused, grounded and connected to the surrounding environment. Still, negative thoughts always persist, especially those that have been with us always. They may don different cloaks, but really, at their core, they remained unchanged. If we would only take the time to wrestle with them, we might be able to extract something useful. We could even build out of these many lesser manifestations a single and more comprehensive one of power. Power that implies not only confidence and strength, but also humility. By increasing degrees, the suit of swords is seeing us enter into the deeper mysteries of the mind, the interplay between the conscious and subconscious. Much too often, though, as the so-called conscious beings that we are, we underestimate the power of the subconscious. We treat it as something lesser, something that's beneath us, which is in reality the surest way to get swallowed up by it. Our best chance as we come into contact with its inhabitants is to learn the delicate art of negotiation, to transform these apparent enemies into partners of trade. Strange beings indeed practice strange customs and speak strange languages, and all of these we'll need to master. As we travel back and forth from home to foreign land and back again, our appetite for new knowledge increases, and as it does, our faculties of discrimination sharpen. We know what to take away and what to leave behind. Here the swords are truly in their element. When it comes to primitive impulses, however, there's only so much the intellect can do. Here it may seem like the only viable solution is to restrict, to cut back on excesses. To do that, it's not only important to cultivate willpower and discipline, but we have to also learn to let go of the binding guilt that chains the addicted mind into self-isolation. Overall, if there's only one theme to take away from the swords, it's that the mind must be stilled. Like the Buddha who comes under attack by the holographic armies of Mara, we come to finally realize that the mind's perceived reality actually originates from within. It's the product of the deep subconscious, where fears are manufactured without end. The simple act of paying attention to them exposes them, little by little, to the healing light of conscious awareness, which ties into the Ten of Swords, for many the most discouraging archetype within the Rider-Waite's Minor Arcana. Its imagery is dark and foreboding, yet it represents the swords at their most developed stage. And although it doesn't really seem like it, their final target serves as a reminder of how the mind is always working for our survival. The reason why we humans have the capacity to see ourselves dying 1,000 deaths is so that in real life we don't have to. In this way, the swords fulfill their purpose of cutting away at what is not needed in order to clear the way for what is. When we recognize the mind as such an instrument, one that for our own sake seeks and destroys, we become aware that true consciousness has nothing to do with our concept of self. So far, what we've been calling the self is really just a collection of miscellaneous thoughts. Only by ceasing to identify with these can we claim to have killed their fake construct. And as it lays there dying, all the energy we've wastefully invested simply begins to flow back into true consciousness, illuminating the real self that waits behind the false one. The water-bearing cup is a symbol of the heavenly spirit, the ace especially, its cup overflowing with pure water. Imagery that evokes primordial memories of a world that existed before time, before the exit from the womb, when the earth was without form and void, and the divine spirit was moving over the face of the waters. From this unconscious state arises consciousness itself, where the chaos of timelessness is finally divided into day and night. This duality is reflected in the ancient Sumerian creation myth, as the archetypal soul Marduk does battle with Tiamat, the primordial mother. From Tiamat's oceanic being, Marduk releases life's infinite potential. When Marduk and Tiamat meet, they are meeting as lovers as well as opponents, and together they participate in the divine act of creation, which is the spark that unites them. That mysterious third being that serves as the connecting bridge between the two worlds. Together, these three deities form a sacred trinity, whose purpose it is to portion out destinies. They give us each our part in the bounty of life. When we feel them churning within us, we're becoming attuned to one of Spirit's most joyful mysteries, that of emotional resonance. This principle can be seen in those people who've managed to create within themselves a feeling of what it is they're attracting. By emitting a specific emotion, they make it manifest. Inevitably, this leads to the recognition that the construction of our solid world is initiated by emotional frequency, which is the beginning of our connection to the true essence of being. A well of infinite meaning out of which the world is constantly reborn. Deep within is where the sacred alchemy takes place, the eternal exchange between spirit and matter, an inner cosmos of constant creation. But with everything created there's something lost, which evokes the age-old question of the cup either half empty or half full. Do we rejoice over what is, or despair over what is not? Do we choose to believe in a universe that conspires for good or evil? By choosing good, we let go of what's been lost and fill what remains with the ever-flowing spring of universal life, which prompts us to put our first tentative steps into the promised land. As the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas states, the kingdom of heaven is within and without. In other words, it's everywhere. This becomes all the more real as we start to recognize the basic spiritual laws under which it is governed. Under Spirit, we're free to choose between the higher good and everything else. We're free to decide whether we let higher self guide us, or whether it'll be ego, greed, lust, or any other base desire. In the end, there's only one possible answer. Whatever the question, the answer that resolves it is always associated with that one true feeling. Even when we're not attuned to it, we can feel it. Even when we're forced on detours, down roads where the higher meaning must be literally spelled out before us. In the end, no matter how persuasive the temptations may be, the increasing emptiness that our bad choices bring about can only serve to lead us back on the one true path. We know we're on that path when we're in the flow. The Chinese master Lao Tzu states that the supreme good is like water, which nourishes all things without trying to. When we're receptive to that supreme good, we're in Spirit's most natural state. Here, we effortlessly temper the soul, a soul that has become no less alive, nor any less passionate, but simply lets itself be guided by Spirit. From such inner fulfillment follows renewed outer fulfillment. The Ten of Cups evokes both of these, both happiness and power. This is where soul and spirit come together as one. More generally, it's the union of order and chaos. And that's ultimately what the number 10 represents. Whichever element it happens to be in, it symbolizes the marriage of 1 and 0, the magician and fool, living together in perfect harmony.